It was the height of summer in 2019 when Emily and Claire, two sisters just a few years apart in age, packed their bags for what was supposed to be a simple weekend adventure. Emily, the older one at 22, had always been the more responsible sister, while Claire, only 19, was carefree and eager for excitement. Their plan was straightforward: a quiet camping trip in the forests surrounding Lake Ravenwood, a place they had visited once before as children. They promised their parents they would be home by Sunday evening, smiling as they assured them it was just a short trip to unplug from everything. No one imagined those would be the last words the family would ever hear from them. When the sisters didn't return by Sunday night, their parents began to worry. At first, they thought perhaps Emily and Claire had simply lost track of time. But when their calls went unanswered, panic set in. By Monday morning, the father drove to the campsite, hoping to find his daughters laughing around a dying fire. Instead, he found their tent abandoned, the campfire cold, and their backpacks still inside. Their phones were discovered zipped neatly into a side pocket, both powered off. The car sat untouched just a few feet away, as though the sisters had walked into the woods and never come back. What struck investigators immediately was the eerie neatness of the scene. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned chairs, no scattered belongings. Everything appeared as though the sisters had simply stood up and walked away in the middle of their camping trip. Their shoes were missing from the tent, but nothing else suggested where they could have gone. Rangers familiar with the area said it was unusual. Most missing hikers leave behind trails, dropped items, or tracks that can be followed. Here, there was nothing but silence and empty forest. The surrounding woods were thick and unforgiving, stretching for miles in every direction. Search dogs picked up faint scents, leading down to the lake's shoreline. But the trail ended abruptly at the water's edge, as if the sisters had vanished into thin air. Helicopters scanned the tree line, rescue teams combed every trail, and divers even checked the shallows of the lake. But all efforts came up empty. There were no footprints in the mud, no clothing snagged on branches, no evidence of animals nearby. It was as though the forest itself had swallowed the sisters whole. Word of the disappearance spread quickly through nearby towns, and fear began to ripple through the community. Families who once camped at Lake Ravenwood every summer started canceling trips, and locals whispered about the place being cursed. Some claimed they had heard strange sounds near the lake at night. Soft voices calling their names or footsteps, echoing where no one stood. Whether those were just fearful imaginations or something more sinister, no one could say for sure. But one fact remained certain. Emily and Claire were gone, leaving behind nothing but questions. And the mystery of their disappearance was only beginning. The moment the sisters were reported missing, authorities wasted no time in launching a massive search effort. By dawn on Tuesday, helicopters hovered low over the treetops, their searchlights cutting through the heavy mist that clung to the forest floor. Volunteers poured in from nearby towns, bringing flashlights, radios, and supplies. The woods around Lake Ravenwood echoed with voices calling Emily and Claire's names, but the forest gave no reply. Despite the sheer number of people scouring the area, it was as though the two young women had been erased from existence. Search dogs were brought in, noses pressed to the girls' clothing in hopes of catching a trail. At first, the dogs barked and tugged toward the shoreline, pulling handlers toward the lake as if something, or someone, had been there. But the moment they reached the water's edge, the animals stopped, whining in confusion. Some circled restlessly, pacing back and forth as if unsure which direction to go. It was a troubling sign for investigators. The sisters' last trace seemed to end at the lake, and beyond that, there was nothing. Authorities expanded the search perimeter, combing through miles of forest trails. Teams found faint impressions in the dirt, but none matched clear human footprints. Some looked distorted, as though they had been dragged or smudged out by something heavy. Others disappeared entirely after just a few yards, leaving investigators puzzled. Rangers with decades of experience admitted they had never seen tracks vanish so suddenly. Every night, the search grew colder, the forest more menacing, as if it were swallowing its secrets deeper into the shadows. Divers entered the lake multiple times, their beams of light slicing through the dark, murky water. They hoped to find any trace, a shoe, clothing, or even disturbed sediment that could explain where the sisters had gone. But each dive ended with the same unsettling report: nothing. The water remained silent, its depths hiding whatever truth it held. The lack of evidence only made the situation more chilling. If the girls had entered the lake, their bodies should have surfaced within days. But days stretched into weeks, and still, nothing appeared. Meanwhile, the campsite itself became a focal point for clues. Investigators studied the sisters' belongings, looking for any sign of struggle or forced entry. Strangely, the tent zipper was drawn neatly, their clothes were folded, and their supplies organized, almost too carefully, as though someone had deliberately staged the scene. Friends and neighbors of the family whispered about it, saying it looked less like a disappearance and more like someone had erased the girls' presence with methodical precision. Yet, no fingerprints beyond the sisters' own were found, and the silence surrounding their fate only grew heavier with every passing hour. As weeks turned into months, the official investigation grew cold, and whispers began to spread like wildfire through the small towns surrounding Lake Ravenwood. People needed answers, and in the absence of evidence, speculation filled the silence. Some believed the sisters had simply run away, choosing to disappear and start new lives. But their parents dismissed the idea instantly. Emily was planning her graduate studies, and Claire had just started a job she loved. Both sisters had left behind money, clothes, and friends they adored. To the family, the idea of them vanishing willingly was unthinkable. The second theory pointed toward something far darker: abduction. Rumors surfaced of a drifter spotted near the campground in the days before the sisters' disappearance. Locals described him as tall, unkempt, and always watching from a distance. He was never identified, and when authorities tried to track him down, he had already vanished. Some were convinced he had taken the girls, lured them away, and left behind no trace. Yet, with no evidence of struggle, no tire marks leading away, and no witnesses who actually saw him interact with the sisters, the theory remained frustratingly thin. Others whispered about the woods themselves. Lake Ravenwood had long been the center of unsettling stories, passed down through generations. Campers claimed they had heard voices at night, whispers that drifted across the water, calling their names. Hunters reported seeing pale figures along the shoreline that disappeared the moment they were approached. An old legend told of the drowned woman, a spirit of a young girl who died in the lake a century ago and was said to lure the living into the water to keep her company. While most brushed it off as folklore, the chilling similarities to Claire's diary entries later made the theory harder to ignore. Theories grew stranger as time went on. Some townsfolk believed the sisters had stumbled into something they weren't supposed to see: an illegal operation, hidden deep in the forest. perhaps smuggling or something worse. Others swore the government was involved, covering up something dark beneath the waters of Ravenwood, though no one could say what. Conspiracy theorists latched onto every detail, from the odd behavior of the search dogs to the eerie emptiness of the tent, spinning them into sinister possibilities. Each theory only deepened the fear surrounding the case, and no one could agree on the truth. But the most haunting theory came from those who lived closest to the lake. They claimed that Ravenwood wasn't just another camping spot. It was a place that took people. Over the years, there had been whispers of other vanishings, a fisherman who never returned, a child who wandered from a campsite and was never seen again. None of those cases had made headlines, but the locals remembered, and now, with Emily and Claire gone, the pattern seemed too unsettling to ignore. Still, without proof, these stories remained nothing more than chilling speculation, leaving the truth about the sisters, fate buried in rumor and shadow. For most families, time brings healing. But for Emily and Claire's parents, time only sharpened the wound. Every morning, their mother would wake expecting a call, a knock on the door, any sign that her daughters had returned. She refused to pack away their belongings, keeping their rooms exactly as they had left them. Claire's sketchbook open on her desk, Emily's favorite sweater draped over the chair. Their father, though quieter, carried the obsession in his own way. He kept maps of the Ravenwood area pinned to the wall, covered in notes, circles, and red markers where search parties had already been. Their home became less of a sanctuary and more of a shrine to unanswered questions. As weeks turned into months, the parents began retracing the investigation themselves. They walked the trails around Lake Ravenwood, calling their daughters' names into the silent trees. They visited the campsite over and over, sometimes just standing by the cold fire pit, staring at the tent still preserved in evidence photos, burned into their minds. Friends and neighbors told them to let go, to try and move forward. But the parents couldn't. Every fiber of their being told them their daughters were still out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. The couple became familiar faces in town meetings and local news reports, always pushing authorities to keep searching. They wrote letters to state officials, begged for new divers to re-examine the lake, and even hired private investigators when official resources dried up. Their lives revolved around Ravenwood. Each holiday and birthday became another painful reminder of the empty chairs at their table, fueling their determination to find answers. The obsession was no longer just about hope. It was about survival, about clinging to something when everything else had been taken. By the second year, their efforts had grown more ritualistic. On every anniversary of the disappearance, the family would drive back to Ravenwood, carrying lanterns and setting them along the lake's edge. They would light them one by one, their flickering glow casting eerie reflections across the dark water. The parents would sit for hours in silence, staring at the still surface, as if waiting for their daughters to step out of the forest or rise from the water. Locals sometimes saw them standing there at night, their figures illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns, and whispered that grief had driven them to the edge of madness. Still, no matter how much time passed, the sisters' parents refused to stop. Every rumor, every sighting, every strange story connected to the lake was followed up. They clung desperately to the smallest details, even when authorities dismissed them as meaningless. To outsiders, it looked like denial. But to the parents, it was love, an unshakable conviction that Emily and Claire's story wasn't finished yet. And though the world had moved on, they remained bound to Ravenwood, searching its shadows year after year, unwilling to let their daughters be forgotten. It wasn't law enforcement who uncovered the first real clue. It was the parents themselves, desperate and unwilling to let the case fade into silence. By the third year, they had exhausted every official channel and decided to hire a private investigator with experience in cold cases, unlike the authorities, who had dismissed the lake early on. This investigator insisted that Ravenwood's depths hadn't been searched thoroughly enough. If the trail ends at the water, he told them, then that's where we start again. His words reignited hope in the parents, though deep down, they feared what might be found. A specialized dive team was brought in, equipped with sonar and underwater cameras. The lake was dark and heavy with silt, its bottom a tangle of weeds and fallen branches. Visibility was almost zero, and every movement stirred clouds of black water that made searching nearly impossible. For hours, divers surfaced with nothing but frustration. But on the third day, one diver's hand brushed against something unnatural beneath the muck. Fabric, thick and heavy, wedged between rocks. When he tugged it free, it emerged like a ghost from the depths, a waterlogged sleeping bag. At first, no one wanted to believe it. The object was filthy, stained with mud and algae. But as the divers carefully opened it, their worst suspicions were confirmed. Inside were decayed remnants of personal belongings. An old necklace with a delicate silver chain, one that Emily had been known to wear every day. There was also a faded plastic bag tucked deep inside, its seal miraculously intact despite years underwater. Inside the bag was a small notebook, warped but legible, Claire's diary. The moment the parents saw it, their world collapsed all over again. Divers continued their search, and soon uncovered a second sleeping bag, entangled in weeds just a few feet away from the first. This one was in even worse condition, barely holding together after years submerged. But the discovery was undeniable. Both sisters had been at the lake, and whatever had happened to them was tied to those silent, black waters. Yet, there were no bodies, only the empty shells of the lives they once lived. The parents' grief transformed into something sharper, a desperate hunger for answers that now seemed closer, but also far more terrifying. The news of the discovery spread quickly, stirring old fears and fueling new speculation. Reporters swarmed the area. Townspeople whispered that the lake had finally given back part of its secret, and the legend of Ravenwood grew darker. But for the parents, the discovery was both a blessing and a curse. They finally had proof their daughters had been there. But it raised even more horrifying questions. Who placed the sleeping bags at the bottom of the lake? Were Emily and Claire dragged there against their will, or had something lured them into the water? And most disturbing of all, if the sleeping bags were here, why weren't there bodies? The diary was swollen from years underwater, its pages warped and stuck together, but remarkably, much of the writing could still be read. Investigators and the family pored over every line, desperate for answers. Claire's neat handwriting filled the early pages with ordinary details. Setting up the tent, roasting marshmallows, and laughing with her sister by the campfire. But as the entries went on, the tone shifted. She began mentioning sleepless nights, describing how she and Emily both heard faint whispers near the lake, like voices carrying across the water though no one else was around. Claire wrote that Emily brushed it off as the wind. But Claire wasn't convinced. The entries grew darker. Claire described how the whispers grew louder with each passing night. Sometimes they sounded like strangers, other times like familiar voices, friends, family, even their own parents, calling them closer to the shoreline. She wrote about waking in the middle of the night to find Emily already standing outside the tent, staring at the lake as if in a trance. When Claire pulled her back inside, Emily swore she didn't remember leaving the tent at all. The unsettling incidents repeated themselves, and Claire admitted she began to fear not just the lake, but what it was doing to her sister. One passage in particular disturbed investigators. Claire wrote that Emily had started speaking softly in her sleep, murmuring things Claire couldn't fully understand, except for one chilling phrase that repeated again and again. "She's waiting in the water." Claire confessed she wanted to leave immediately, but Emily had insisted they stay, claiming she needed to see something at the lake before they left. That disagreement was one of Claire's last clear entries before the handwriting began to change. Shaky, uneven, as if written in fear or haste. The second to last entry was short but disturbing. "Voices are closer tonight. They know our names. I don't think they want us to leave." The final page was smeared and nearly unreadable, but investigators managed to piece together fragments. The words, "Sure, Emily," and "She's here," stood out. The very last line, scrawled across the bottom margin in trembling ink, read, "Emily is standing by the water. She says it's time to follow." After that, the pages were blank. For the parents, reading those words was unbearable. To investigators, it was a puzzle without a solution. Did the girls willingly walk into the lake under some unseen influence? Was someone, or something, manipulating them? Or was Claire's fear exaggerating normal sounds in the wilderness, creating a terrifying illusion that ended in tragedy? The diary gave the most intimate glimpse into the sisters' final moments. Yet it offered no explanation, only more haunting questions. And with no bodies ever recovered, those questions remained unanswered, buried in the silence of Ravenwood's waters. Even after the discovery of the sleeping bags and Claire's diary, the case of Emily and Claire remained one of the most baffling mysteries the region had ever seen. Authorities held press conferences, but every announcement ended the same way. No definitive answers. Without the sisters' bodies, investigators couldn't confirm if the girls had drowned, been murdered, or simply walked away from the lake into some darker fate. For the parents, the silence from officials was unbearable. They had fought for years to find a trace of their daughters, only to be left with fragments and questions that cut deeper than ever. The townspeople, meanwhile, turned Ravenwood into a place of both fear and fascination. Some refused to go near it, convinced the lake was cursed, and claiming the sisters had been claimed by something unnatural. Others flocked there out of morbid curiosity, setting up their tents near the water in hopes of hearing the same whispers described in the diary. A few even claimed they did. Voices calling softly at night, sounds too distinct to be the wind. Whether they were real or imagined, no one could agree, but the legend of the lake began to grow stronger than the facts themselves. Investigators tried to follow up on other possibilities. Could someone have drowned the sisters and hidden their bodies deeper in the forest? Could the sleeping bags have been staged to mislead the search? The lack of evidence left every path open, and the diary only made things more complicated. To some, it was proof of something supernatural. To others, it was simply the ramblings of a frightened girl. Experts analyzed the handwriting, the phrasing, even the ink, but nothing suggested it was fabricated. Whatever Claire wrote, she believed it. And that truth was perhaps the most chilling of all. The parents continued their yearly rituals, returning to the lake with lanterns and flowers, speaking their daughters' names into the silence. Reporters who visited them described the eerie sight of two grieving figures, standing at the edge of the black water, waiting, as if expecting Emily and Claire to step out of the shadows at any moment. Their faith that the girls were still out there, somewhere, never wavered. And as the years passed, their obsession only deepened, becoming part of the lake's lore itself. Yet the deeper the mystery grew, the more it consumed everyone who touched it. Divers swore they felt unseen currents in the lake pulling at them. Locals whispered of lights that flickered across the water at night. And visitors who camped near Ravenwood claimed to wake to the sound of footsteps outside their tents, only to find no one there. Whether Emily and Claire were victims of a crime, an accident, or something unexplainable, no one could say. All that remained certain was this: the lake still held its secrets, and the sleeping bags at the bottom were only part of a story that may never be fully told. And so, the story of Emily and Claire remains one of the most chilling mysteries of our time. Their sleeping bags were found. Their diary was uncovered, but the truth of what happened to them has never surfaced. Did someone take them? Did the lake itself claim them? Or were they drawn into something far darker than we can understand? Perhaps we'll never know. All that's left is a cold, silent lake, and questions that may never find answers. What do you think really happened that night? Was it a crime, an accident, or something beyond this world? Let me know your theories in the comments below, because this story still keeps me awake at night.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.